My name is Brian Colin. I'm a video game designer, animator, artist. Started back in 1982, and I didn't start out to do that. I was a college student who went to school for film, and I kind of paid the bills during college by doing ads for newspapers and stuff like that. I did animated commercials for a local hardware store, and basically I did kind of just worked for beer and pretzels for the most part back in those days. And I did that for a couple of years. I never really thought of myself as an artist because I was having fun drawing. So it was just something I was lucky enough to do, and I did that for quite a few years. Well, in retrospect, not all that long, but for a couple of years. And I did films during that time. One of them was a documentary of what Carbondale was like at Halloween, which kind of made national news. And I did a film called In Search of a Plot, which was an animated film about a filmmaker trying to think of what to make a film about, that began and ended with death. But funny little thing, and I saw an ad one day for the Bally Midway company, and it said, Bally Midway's looking for an animator. And I thought, what would a pinball company? Oh, they want somebody who has cell painting experience to do the back glasses. This is what, what college kid thinks of. And I got there and they said, no, we've seen your film. We want to hire you as an animator for video games. And I'm thinking, Pac-Man? Really? You need someone to do that? And I got the call that said I was hired, and they were paying me like real money, $13,000 a year, and I was at a wedding, and I'm hanging up the phone, and I tried to make a joke out of it, and I said, turned to my friends, I said, well, that's it. Childhood's over. I got a real job. And I choked up, and man, was I wrong. I mean, the very first thing I got to work on was Discs of Tron. It was in the very early stages. It was originally supposed to be part of the original Tron game, but the programmer said, no, I don't like the animation. I'm not rushing this out too early. And from week one, I fell in love, and I knew I had fallen bass-backwards into the best place I could possibly be. The programmer was a perfectionist. He had very clear orders. He knew exactly what he wanted, but he was open to suggestion. So, when I'm playing the game, and I'm not much of a video game player back then, especially, and the guy falls off the disc, well, he reached the edge of the disc. It's like, wait a minute, I'm an animator. How about when you get to the edge of the disc, you go like this for a second or two to give the player a warning before you knock him off? Great, good idea. So in that kind of simple exchange, in the first few weeks I was there, I realized this was a wonderful place for a creative challenge, which I didn't know it at the time, but that's what I live for. That was a programmer, Bob Dinnerman. He was fantastic. And in those days, nobody else was around. We weren't in the main factory. We were in a little building off to one side. Management never came around. And there was a game out on test that had been made before I was there, and it was bombing. So I said, well, it's because the art looks like every other space game in the world. But, why don't we change the art? So I drew a little character on the thing, and sure enough, they had me reskin the entire game. We sent it out on test. It made enough money. Then we went into production, and I'm only there a couple of months, and they're letting me do this kind of stuff. This wouldn't have happened in the world today. Now you've got 400 people working on a game for 5 years. This was 3 people max on most games for 11 months. So Cosmic Cruiser became a game because I made an offhand comment and drew something. They liked it, management liked it so much, they put the character into Wacko, which was a game being done out of house at the time that wasn't doing very well, but they redesigned it, and Cosmic Cruiser ended up in Wacko. Around the same time, the beautiful thing about being an animator was I was working on everything. I get to work a little bit on this, a little bit on this, a little bit on this. Spy Hunter is one of the second game really that I worked on, but I'm working on other games at the same time. And again, this programmer, very open to ideas. So every time we turn around, we're adding new crazy stuff to the game. And like I say, management left us alone. Can we do this? Who's gonna stop us? It was that kind of a college nerd mentality of all of us hanging together. And then management came in with engineering notebooks. And from now on, every idea that any of you have, we need you to write down and have it co-signed by at least 3 other people. And they handed it to us while we were doing a Spy Hunter meeting. So we all wrote down, if you can read any of those, the absolute worst possible names in the world that we could come up for Spy Hunter, like Dukes of Tron and Classification Dull and Start Key and Clutch. And then we all signed them, and then we all threw away our books because we were, I probably have the only book left in existence, and the only pages were that. So we did fly under the radar. It was a great time to be designing games. For a while, the game was called Battle Scars, which was one of those terrible names. So that was some concept art we did. And then in those days, you were not a designer. You're not a designer. You're not a designer. You're a programmer. You're an artist. You're a sound engineer. You are a mechanical engineer. You cannot put your names in the games. Don't ever think anybody's ever going to call you a designer. So we hid our names in the cabinet art. Well, we didn't, but the guys down in the pinball art department did. That whole, if you remember Spy Hunter, that whole water rack was the idea of myself and a buddy of mine who I got a job there. It's like they were ready to put it out, and give us some more art. We can add a water level to this. And so it was that loose and that open in my first year there. And then I'm asking the question, where do these ideas come from? And Sharon, the gal who was the animator there before me, said, well, we've got a list of ones that people come up with and nobody does them. And I said, there's a game here, it looks like real-time strategy, Ant Raid, where two hives of ants are fighting over food in a dump. I said, let's do it. Why aren't you doing this? It's great. Well, ants are ugly, so I did a cartoon ant. 2 weeks later, they hired a programmer and put him on it. The guy actually left before the game got finished, so it never got really. It went to test, but it went out as a 2-player only game, so it didn't have a 1-player version, so that it never made enough money to get anything done. But that's how crazy it was in those early days. Offhand comment from someone, and everybody back and forth was very much peer-to-peer. Everybody helped with everything, which I didn't realize was unusual at that time. But it was a wonderful, so I started working on a lot of different games. Like I said, at once, you're working on multiple things. Demo Derby was the next one. In that game, I taught one of the other artists how to do, scaling. We figured out how we could do scaling, even though it wasn't part of the thing. And my job on this one was the round girls between each card, which everybody credited me with great artistic skill. Yeah, I just managed to turn pixel art into what I could make the most of it. Then the programmer on that game and I were both wanting to make a tank game, and I've been wanting since Ant Raid never came out to make a game where the player was controlling multiple characters. So with Sarge, it's like, let's make a tank game, but you can either be flying a helicopter or run over and get into your tank, and you can cooperate, you can fight with each other, the other player, or you can both fight together against the computer. So that was kind of a change and a little innovation there, and Sarge did pretty well. In this game, I made an error. And again, I make lots of errors. Don't be fooled by the fact that a lot of my games are well known. In this game, during one of the last weeks, if you got high enough, the one girl would go to a low-cut little thing. And then in Jeff and my version that we were taking home, I made it go a little farther than that. And then about 3 days into production, we realized that Jeff and mine version actually had gone into production. So we had to run downstairs to the factory. By now we were back in the factory building, and tell them to change the ROMs. So there are a few of these out in the real world, but again, it's at a very high level, and almost nobody has ever seen it. Around that time, I came up with a game called Swackery. One of the programmers who was wasn't working on a game, but he was a tools programmer, helped me put it together. Management liked it. We started, it got released in about the week. That has a special place for me because they were showing Nolan Bushnell. They were starting to deal with Sente by that time, showing Nolan Bushnell through the offices, and they're showing him this game, and management says, and this is our new game, Swackery, and here's the designer, Brian Colin. I ran out and changed my business cards the very next day. So, because to my knowledge, they'd never called anyone a designer before. Zwackery was a really cool, very different kind of multi-level game where you could cast spells and pick up spells, very Dungeons and Dragons feel to it. And not every game, like I say, Rampage, great. I've done a lot of games that a lot of people know. Here's one you've never seen. Not everything that came out of this head was brilliant, let's face it. It was originally called Dune Quest. We were told to make a game where slapping buttons was the big thing, so we made a game in which the player was a fur bikini-clad cave woman sitting on top of a giant red pterodactyl with a boomerang in her hand, and the pterodactyl would run along the ground eating watermelons, and as faster you ran, the higher you could jump, and then you would jump into the air and spit watermelon seeds at giant invisible killer bees. And I have no idea why that didn't take off. No pun intended. It was a ridiculous idea, and a lot of it was because they told us we couldn't do scaling, and so I tried to figure out a way to scale things with this hardware without really thinking about whether or not anybody would really want to play something this ridiculous. So that did not go into production. The little glimpse of stuff I showed there before we started this became known as the legendary Lost Laserdisc game. We filmed, we were given, as some of you know, we were given a small budget. After Laserdisc came out, I said, I'm a filmmaker. I can do this. I'd already written and programmed a interactive text adventure, and I said, I can turn that into a script, and we can make a video game that is basically like a text adventure. You see a bit of the movie, and there's a guy here, he wants money, do you want it? And then you get A, B, or C. Do you jump out the window? Do you invite him in? Or do you shout, I'm not here? You pick a thing and you see the appropriate scene. Just as I finished the film in 1984, Bally decided they were no longer going to be doing disc games, so it sat in my basement in 16-millimeter cans for 25 years until Doc Mack at the Galloping Ghost Arcade in Chicago heard about it and said, I want to do a restoration. And I said, well, I never finished the game. He says, Brian, you're still making games. So the game was completed, and that's Sharon, one of my favorite animators I worked with there at Bally. And that was the night I mentioned earlier where it was actually snowing inside. It was that cold in this abandoned mental institution. But it is now a game. He turned it into an arcade game and sold it. And it's also now on Steam, and it's called The Spectre Files Deathstalker. And, okay. Let's go past that. And then, unlike other games that, you stop, you go back to the beginning, or this game, actually, every time you play it, it's a complete film. You either beat the bad guy, or you end up dead. But it's a complete film. It never goes back. When you get knocked unconscious, you wake up in a new place, and the story goes on. As a filmmaker, I was very, very, vampires wanted, no experience necessary. That's literally how I cast this film in Chicagoland back in the day. Okay, and it's in the arcade now. Okay, so this is more for the designers out there, or wannabe designers. The biggest thing about design is not how to use the tools. It's not, for me anyway, it's this right here. If someone tells you no, you say, why not? Because a better understanding means your creative thinking makes you come up with things that other people that understand the rules aren't quite seeing. So when I say design inspiration, that's just what I mean. Rampage, unlike, people always ask where it came from. I had just done Zwackery that had big characters. I wanted to do another game with big characters, and I saw other companies doing background animation, and my guys from the office were all sitting around after a trade show, and it's like, why can't, no, Brian, you can't, no, we're not gonna spend money, but can't you, no, Brian, here's what you can do. You can move a rectangle, one rectangle at a time. That's all you can do. What are you gonna do with that? So I turned to Sharon, she's in the red dress there, and I said, so a building collapsing into itself fast enough, that's a moving rectangle. And what knocks down buildings? The big characters I wanted today. We knew, the team was so excited, the four of us. I called in a programmer to make sure I explained to him what I wanted to do. Yes, we could do that. Wrote up the thing, and that's right. Psychology of Rampage, or why this is next year's #1 game. We were freaking pumped. Showed it to my boss, and of course he said, no. So I went over his head, went to the head of engineering. He loved it. Head of engineering said, this is great, this is funny, this is wonderful, but we can't do it. You're eating people, you're the bad guy, he said, no, you're the victim. You didn't ask to be turned into a, no, can't do it. One of the top 3 guys at the company, no. And just by pure coincidence, the top 3 guys of the company were fired by Bally Corporate the next week. We had started on it already just to prove we could do what we thought we could do. Oh, aside, that is me, who played George in human form. That's my wife, Ray, who played Lizzie, and that's Jeff Nauman, the programmer and co-designer, who's Ralph. Anyway, he was fired and replaced by a guy who came from Montgomery Ward's, if you remember that retail store. He sent a note around and said, don't worry, everybody's job is safe. It's just an upper management change. And, you know, I've got an open door policy. So you can probably guess who was waiting outside his door on his very first day. I was sitting there with my back against the door. I was the first meeting the guy had at the new company. He gave Rampage the green light, and it went on to be the highest earning video game of all time at that time. It was a 3-player game. It got kicked out of 7-Eleven stores because too many kids were hanging out in the store playing it. And then I had the idea, since there wasn't much, we were pushing that hardware quite a bit. So I said, we're destroyed 125 different cities in the US. So I went to marketing and I said, write a press release that says Sacramento is being destroyed. And of course marketing said, no. So I wrote hundreds of letters to every newspaper in the country and every town that was destroyed, and generated hundreds of newspaper articles, some front page, depending on how big the city was. And so for me, and then the best thing, kind of the capper for Rampage is when, up until that point, any game I'd done, art was always done by the pinball department. The head of the pinball department at that time said, Brian, why aren't you doing the cabinet art? I can do that. So Rampage was the first, and I never stopped doing the cabinet art for all my games. So for me, and the fact that it was ported to every system, and still getting ported to systems, is a real point of pride for me. Rampage is my baby. Now, it's not me. It's always a team effort. Don't ever miss, even though the teams were small back in those days, you know, mechanical engineers, the hardware guys, you know, the sound guy, the, you know, programmer, usually multiple artists, are all work on a game. But that Rampage is the one I'm very, very proud of. And of course, we never doubted it for a minute. And then management wanted more. They wanted another multiplayer game, so I came up with XENOPHOBE. I had just seen Aliens, as you can probably guess, because the plot was basically, this was another 3-player game, except I hated the fact that we couldn't scroll. But using the same move a block one at a time real fast, we turned the game into let 3 players scroll in different directions around the spaceship, trying to eliminate all the aliens they could as fast as they can before the spaceship blew up. And borrowing from Zwackery and that Dungeons and Dragons things, you could pick up things and use them elsewhere. You could turn off the timer. You could, and it went very well. And they put it out on test, and normally test was about 2 months to give you to see if people liked it and everything else. Testing was one of my favorite parts. And unfortunately, this did so well on test that management said, we're releasing it next week, or in 2 weeks. And I was like, no, it's not done yet. There's things in this game that, you know, there's seeds that you can pick up that over here are gonna grow. And all the art was done, but the programmer on this was a newbie programmer, and he wanted to be a pinball programmer anyway. So he didn't join me in my fight to keep it from going into production. So while it made as much money as Rampage earnings lasted for years. This was more like the average video game that was hot at beginning and dropped off quick. So while it's still a wonderful game. If you actually look in the ROMs, you will see there are space suits, and you could have put those seeds in a little place and grown food and that kind of thing. But yeah, XENOPHOBE was the next game. It was a 3-player game. And again, I kept doing the cabinet art and having fun doing that. It got ported to a lot of home systems. And now I'm just going to take a second here to talk about testing, because back in the arcade days, that was the most wonderful part for a lot of reasons. Game testing was, no one's, back unlike now where things get leaked out and nobody saw anything until it went out on test. And then it's in secure locations, they were public places. But it was wonderful because I used to, you can stand in a room in the dark watching little children, there's got to be a better way to say that, watching players play the game and see what ticks them off, see if they're walking away mad, see if they're digging as fast as they can for that next quarter. The testing was very real. Now, I've been doing games for 42 years, and I've got focus groups and I've got testing reports, especially when the arcade days went away. But there was nothing like actually seeing the look on the players' faces. That's one of the reasons I love coming to shows, is because I once again get to see siblings playing together, strangers playing together, laughing at stuff that I've created. It's just an absolutely wonderful feeling, and I love the fact that shows are like this are still keeping games alive from my era, because I get to see it again and again. After that, we were asked to do a game in 2 months for a European show. It was called International Team Laser. It didn't do very well over there, so we turned it into Blasted, which was released here, and it did okay. Blasted was a fun one. Oh, and that's my lovely wife again, and some idiot with a gun. And then I did some driving games for a while. The hardware did not support it. This was kind of, every now and then you just got to do what you got to do. We did a game called Max RPM that used kind of the changing colors, first-person driver thing that other people were doing very well. Our hardware wasn't really meant for it. And we also did Spy Hunter 2, which does not live up to the Spy Hunter game at all. It was a first-person driving game, kind of like Mad Max-looking characters in the background. They were fun to do, and again, and we also did games. Bally Midway wanted to do kit games that you could turn your Pac-Man into, and I did several of those. Shoot the Bull was a great dart game, but the truth was Pac-Man earned more than any of their kit games, so we didn't sell a lot of those. And around that time, my buddy, Jeff Nauman, who worked on me with Rampage and Sarge, he said, Brian, I've got it. He comes in, he throws down an airline barf bag on the table and says, I've got it. Our game where we're controlling multiple players would be perfect for basketball. You can pass, you can call for a pass, you can do this, you can do a pick and roll, it's like, Jeff, stop, you're 6'2". I don't know what a pick and roll is. Is that something you put in your hair? It's like, what is a pick and, it's like, and I said, and players out there, the ones that love basketball will enjoy the fact that this is like real basketball strategies, but guys like me, I'll play it if I can foul. So that's where Arch Rivals came from, and we were about 3/4 of the way through it, and we were bought out by our biggest competitor, Williams Electronics, who did Joust and Defender and had some brilliant people over there. And we were bought out, and it was a multi-million-dollar buyout, and Jeff and I were the only 2 video game designers they kept. And this is everybody waving goodbye with the traditional one-finger salute. This game, I've heard it was rumored at the time, but I just had it confirmed here a couple of years ago. The sales of Arch Rivals single-handedly paid for the buyout. So if Bally Midway had just hung on for a couple more months, they wouldn't have had to sell, because this made a good pile of money. And as a lot of you know, we came up with a gameplay mechanic that was used in several other Midway games over the next few years. The controlling multiple characters. In fact, while well, I'll get to that later. So this did very, very well. There's Jeff Nauman in the background there. Yeah, this was a great game. A lot of Mad Magazine artists did that port art. I never did port anything to do with ports. I was always working on another game. Never had anything to do with ports, but they were always nice enough to give us copies. That's one of my favorite port art covers. And they're now at Williams Valley Midway, as they were known for a time. We were going to do an Arch Rivals football, and they said, no, we've already got a football game in the works. So we said, okay, we're going to do something. We're going to call it Pigskin, and it's no rules rugby. No first downs, no timeouts, no rules. And it was basically controlling 6 players at once, except it was rugby with battle axes and swords, and you could set people on fire. And we had a lot of fun with this one. And for the first time in a video game, I did a marketing thing where, you know, players had a post office box where they could get a card game. You could play as a tabletop card game. They got a handbook that spelled out all the rules. You could get football jerseys and hats, and we moved a lot of fun product that way. So that was Pigskin. One of the ports was called Jerry Glanville's Pigskin Foot Brawl, which he was known as a bad coach at the time, or a dirty coach. So that's how that ended up. Okay. That is about where the arcade side of things at Bally Midway ended, because I had, for about 7-8 months, been resisting. Electronic Arts wanted me to come work for them, and I said, you know, that'd be great, and you know, offered me very nice packages, but I've got an wooded acre here in Chicagoland suburbs. I could not afford to live out there, so finally they said, okay, what if we gave you the money to start your own company? Okay, we could do that. So Jeff and I left on good terms. We left Williams Valley Midway, which was starting to then just call itself Midway, and went out there and pitched them an idea for a real-time strategy game called General Chaos. General Chaos first, and at first, everything went well at that initial meeting because we were cold. We had left. We went across the country, and then one guy said, "You know, we like this, but can you make it into a? We'd like it to be gang related. Can you make them street gangs?" And I said, "No, absolutely not." And Jeff looks at me because our future's hanging in the balance, and I said, "No, I've got kids, and I want this. This is a silly game. It's toy soldiers. It is not going to be something that's too close to reality." And took a breath, and they were all for it. And it turned out to be their number one earning, selling rather, non-licensed game for them for a year or two. And again, very, very crude. It was on the Sega Genesis. The 4-player controller adapter was kind of created with this game in mind. So that was General Chaos. And I'm going to pause here. This is time for our commercial break. Excuse me. We started another game, Plunder. And we started that and a sequel to General Chaos called Major Snafu. And EA decided that they were going into the arcade business as everybody else was getting out of it. We tried to talk them out of it, but we did one game for them, but they were out of business before we even finished the first game. Major Snafu, though, has never left my thought process. And even though I've had my own company now for 30 years doing video games and PC games and corporate stuff and Facebook stuff and slot machines, this has always been in the back of my mind, and we are doing the sequel. And I announced 11 years ago that we were doing the sequel, and weekend I flew out to LA to do my first podcast with the indoor kids. I found out I had cancer. So that kind of disrupted the start of that game, and the company had to recover, and so did I. And then a few years back, we decided it was time to do it again. We're ready to make the announcement the week before St. Patrick's Day, and COVID happened. So this time I haven't announced it at all, and we're about 3/4 of the way through. Major snafu is coming. It's got all the old characters. It is still a pixel game. It's still a sprite-based game and gameplay. Oh shoot, I'm playing you the wrong thing. That had a marvelous screenshots of the new game, but I put it in the wrong slideshow. So you didn't get to see them. You'll have to take my word for it. The new game is coming. We're about 3/4 of the way through. General Chaos. We're going to do a little crowdfunder towards the end of it. Now, we've continued to do games for other people, and including Midway. And when we were doing stuff for Midway, and they said, we need something. We've got our 14-year-old male covered, but we need something for a broader scope. Jeff and I said, let's redo Rampage. And Rampage World Tour is the result of that. With Rampage World Tour, we put in tons of hidden stuff, because in the original game, for those of you that may have ever played through, it had 700. The original game had 768 levels, and we figured nobody'd ever get to the end, but they did in the arcades, because you could buy in. And then when you got to the end of the original game, all that happened is the monsters looked at you and went, "Arg," because we never thought anybody would get there. So in Rampage World Tour, we put a ton of extra. You can go to hell and eat Hitler in Rampage World Tour. You end up on the moon, you shrink down, and if you're Lizzie, you fall off the one girl's shoulder and land between the top of her spacesuit, which was cut out of some of the home games. We had a lot of fun with it. It's still probably the best known version of Rampage to a lot of people. It did very, very well. It was ported everywhere. And again, arcade. When you're doing publicity stuff, if any of you ever need to do publicity stuff and you want to do a demo derby, do not paint your car up really cool, because 10 seconds after a demo derby starts, you become the target for every other car on the field, and you're out in about 45 seconds. So that's just it's kind of a letdown, but okay, what else? Rampage World Tour. After that, we did Mega Touch games. We went first to Midway, and we wanted to do 3D games that look 3D rather than just poker and those kind of things. They said no, so we went to Merit, and their sales quadrupled the year we released these 3 games. And then we've also been doing casino games, and it's been 32 years since we did General Chaos and formed our own. Star Trek Voyager, a lot of you might know, in the movie theaters in the early 2000s. This was everywhere. 2-player gun game. That was a lot of fun. We're in the studio. We're in Paramount. We're walking around the darkened studio. We're there on a trip out there to get some source material from there. But we're just walking around one of the sets, and all of a sudden, around the corner, mad as hell, guy comes around. What are you doing here? Why are you do not belong here. I am calling the cop. I'm calling security right now. And it's myself and the producer and one of my animators. And my producer turns his back and just ignores it and just turns his back. And so I'm doing the and this guy's chomping on his cigar and he's furious. And my animator goes, "LeVar, I loved episode blah, 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 where you directed blah, 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 and they did this and that, this." And all of a sudden, angry, cigar-chomping LeVar Burton turns into Reading Rainbow right before my eyes. He was wonderful. Then he's showing us around everything. It was great. So doing this for so long, there are so many minutes like that through every game I've worked on about 90 games now. In my 42-year career, and there's always something that makes it wonderful. I think, where are we at for time? I talk and I don't look. Okay, we're doing pretty good. Any questions? Let's take a moment for,
First, a remark.
Yeah.
It wasn't until about 10 years ago that I realized that Ralph doesn't have a tail.
Interesting observation. Would you like to know why?
I know, but
No. Do you know why?
he's sharing George's.
Body.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, we didn't have enough art to do 3 characters, but we could change color palettes. So Ralph is just George with a different head, and we turned him to use the color palette change to squeak in just that. That's how difficult it was or creatively fun it was to make games back then, is you're working with this, but your dream is this. Dream big, figure out how to get it done. That's what a game designer does. This was fun. Just companies came to us and asked us to do a little thing like that for their convention. I was looking at the Torque engine at the time going, hey, I'd like to try, see what I can do with that. They said, okay, 3 things. I said, we can do a whole lot more than that. How about a 3D game where you're racing the truck, players are racing the trucks and everything? And they're like, great, but we want a couple things we insist on. If the trucks hit each other in the game, the paint can't scratch. I said, okay, I'm pretty sure we can do that for you. And then they said, and their top speed with a full load is 4 miles an hour. And they want a racing game. I said, do you mind if we start at a mountaintop and go to the bottom? And they're like, yeah, we're okay with that. So we did a game in which 300 people had lined up to play this, and they did it every year at their convention for, I think, 6 years or 8 years. And it was great because I get to watch people. Oh, and the other thing they said is your player is probably going to not be a video game player. He's probably going to be drunk, and he's just there to have fun. So we designed a game that if they could drive anywhere they wanted, if they just tried to drive over a cliff, we'd let them drive over the cliff. They'd let them take shortcuts. But unbeknownst to them, we would pull them back onto a legit path. And we did it down a mountain, so that by the time they got to the end, they're doing about 180 miles an hour, and they can do rolls and flips, and the company loved it. So that was a case where the challenges in that case were both how can we make that player happy while still making the company happy, and fortunately, it worked out really well. They did it for 6 years at every one of their conventions, and I've met construction workers in the next 10 years doing all kinds of stuff that remember the game from the Con Expo. And then we also made up, a home version they could take home and that kind of stuff. This game was full contact poker on heavily armed, rocket-powered snowmobiles in a 9 square mile area where you picked up your cards, but you could see what the other people were picking up. You could put bounties on them, and then you race to the finish line. Then you would you had to finish to either fold or get in, and it was in a Cthulhu mythos perpetual winter. It is the most fun game, but it was a LAN game or an internet multiplayer game. It is my favorite game to play of any game I've ever done. We only sold about 100,000 copies though, but it was absurd, and I love that game. So okay. Oh, and somebody made an actual. The main sponsor of that game was a mythical beer company called an Evil Brow Beer, and brewery in Illinois actually brewed it for us. Cow tipping was a redemption game, so we've done several of those too. What else? Deliverance was a company that they wanted us to do a game using the art that they'd created for some stuff that they'd done. The Playport was a short-lived system that Buffalo Wild Wings and TGI Fridays had, and I did 14 games in 18 months for them. It was a nice return to my early days where we could quickly turn around games. 2 guys working on them. We did a lot of games in a short amount of time. Unfortunately, the manufacturer was TouchTunes, very successful company who did not understand that operators in arcades were not willing to give back a piece of the quarter. You have to give back a piece of the quarter to songs because they're going back to the artists. this TouchTunes said they wanted a piece of the quarterback. They weren't going to give it to me. They were just wanted a piece, and no operators in the world wanted to do it. They gave away 4,000 systems and eventually had to close after a couple of years because, and these are all games I've done, because no operator was going to give back a piece of that quarter. We had a lot of fun with this, though. These were a lot of fun games on there. All right, I'm going to stop again and go back to question. We can talk about, I can keep talking about games I've been making that you've never heard of for the next hours and hours and hours. We can talk about the movie if you want, or we can just ask more questions. So, yeah, go ahead.
How big is your team for your new game?
I'm sorry?
How big is the team for your new game?
Right now, 5 people. It's just 5 of us.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, no, and it's been remote, and which is horrible for game design, for me anyway, the way I work, and the remote part has been tough. Fortunately, we've begun, one of the programmers has moved up from 500 miles away into my neighborhood, so we are now at last working together, and things are going 10 times faster than they were. We're doing a Kickstarter here in the next month, I hope, or some sort of crowdfunding, so we can get an office to bring everybody else in to finish this up quickly, because it's almost there, and with just 2 of us, it'd be done in, take another 7-8 months. But if we can get everybody in the same place, it's all going to come together nice. But yeah, just 5 of us right now. Well, 6. 2 programmers, 3 artists, and me. So. Oh, yeah, question.
What's the fate of the bat?
Of the
Bat in Rampage. Isn't there a bat that is?
yeah, that was Vern, violent, enraged, radioactive nemesis. Vern was supposed to be a 4th character when they first talked to us about it. They wanted to do a 4-player game, and we said great, and that's why in that original concept art you saw him sipping people through a straw out of a phone booth. And then at the last minute they said, no, we want 3-player game again. So we made Vern a secret character. If you play Rampage World Tour, and you eat some of the purple ooze, you turn into Vern, and you can fly and knock down buildings with 1 punch and that kind of thing. So that's the bat. That was Vern. Yes?
Would it go for any character that you play on Rampage World Tour?
Yeah, any character you played, if you ate the purple ooze, you would turn into Vern. There's a lot of there's like 15 pages of secret stuff in Rampage World Tour. We wanted to make sure nobody could ever say we didn't put enough in there for them. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, that's one of the many, many secrets. Don't eat when the nuns are walking by, don't eat them. You'll get struck by lightning. These are some other games that we've been doing over the years. Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
What was the name of the text adventure you made a long time ago, and what computer was it?
I made it on a K-Pro, if you know that far back, which was an ancient computer. I made it on a K-Pro, writing in assembler. It was my first and last programming activity. I decided I never wanted to have to program again. And then that turned into the Deathstalker movie. So it was the same name, the Spectre Files. You're a detective named Ed Spectre, and you are in search of a missing girl named Buffy MacGuffin. A little throw to Hitchcock there. Okay, yeah.
What was your involvement in the movie?
When I first heard they were making it, I wrote them and said, hey, I'm the designer, I can do this, and got the polite, don't call us, we'll call you. And then I got a call when they were shooting in Chicago from the casting people saying, hey, we understand you made the game, would you like to be in it? Cool. So I was an extra running around for a few weeks in Chicago. Then the assistant director said, you made the game? And I said, yeah. He said, well, let's shoot a cameo. So I spent an entire afternoon running behind a camera car. That can't get any better than that. And then I got a call from one of the producers who's saying, I've been wanting to call you for years, but legal has advised me against it. I assume because they were assuming I'd want money or something. And he said, but they can't stop me now because you actually work for me because you're in the film. And he said, do you want to come out and meet everybody during the last week of shooting? And I did, and everybody was wonderful. They had a tent. It was filmed in Georgia. Studio was in Georgia, and it was, everybody was so nice. I got to see everything that was going on at the time all over the studio. You know, the planes and where they're filming this, and the stuntmen who are playing rock. And they're filming the end of the movie, which if you've seen the movie where George is dying, and Dwayne and Naomi are talking to him, and the character who played George in the armatures for the CGI, he's actually up in a crane, which amazed me. He's in a crane so they could maintain eyesight and doing sign language back and forth. I mean, that's how much they were putting into it. And I was advised that you know, I wouldn't stay in the tent. They put me in a nice air-conditioned tent with a monitor, and it's like, no, I got to be out there. They said, stay away. We don't want anybody looking at you in the scene and screwing that up. So, you know, so stay out of, you know, everyone's sight. And so I stayed quite a ways back. And at some point, the evening I was going home, the producers and the director and I were taking some photos. And in the middle of a scene, 300 yards away, all of a sudden I hear, stop, stop, I gotta be part of that. In the middle of the scene, he and Naomi came running over. He was incredibly nice. I can't even begin to say all the incredibly nice things about him and that he was saying to me. You know, he's telling me he's working harder on, I'm working harder on your film. And it's like, it's not my film, it's your film. It's like, I was told he used to ditch school to play the game as a kid. He was so nice. Everybody was nice. It was a great experience. And then a year later, I got a call from one of my friends in LA who saw a test screening. He said, you are going to love this. He said, there at the end, when the Sears Tower is coming down, your face is 15 feet tall on the screen, and the Sears Tower is coming down. And so I got to go to the premiere with my wife, and I'm sitting there and I'm going, okay, here it comes. Here it comes, here it comes. So at the after party, producer comes up to me and said, yeah, I'm really sorry about this, but 3 weeks ago, Warner came in and cut out 30 minutes, so you ended up on the cutting room floor. But they did interview me, and they put an interview with me on the DVD, so that was okay. But it was a wonderful experience. I thought they did a really great job. Because I was George in the original game, I'm glad they kept George, the sympathetic character, and it was, I knew it was never going to be the kind of ridiculous, childish humor of my game, but I thought they did a good job with the comedy, so I liked it. And so it was fun. It was fun. It was really great. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to let you guys go then. There's a big show out there and with a lot to see, and thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it.
It's the Rampage.
If you ever make it out to California again, there's a